The early morning sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon as Marcus Johnson pulled his bright orange garbage truck onto Maple Avenue. At 5:30 a.m., the suburban streets of Atlanta were still peaceful, with only the occasional jogger or early morning commuter breaking the silence. Marcus had been doing this route for 15 years, and every house, every turn, and every stop had become as familiar to him as his own reflection. At 45 years old, Marcus took pride in his work. His uniform was always clean and pressed, and his truck was maintained better than any other in the fleet. Some might look down on garbage collection as a humble job, but Marcus knew better. He was providing an essential service to his community, and he did it with dignity. This particular Tuesday morning in September started like any other. The air was crisp, carrying the first hints of autumn, and the street lights were just beginning to switch off. Marcus hummed quietly to himself as he navigated the familiar streets, his large hands resting comfortably on the steering wheel. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," he called out to an elderly woman who always waited on her porch to greet him. She waved back enthusiastically, her floral robe wrapped tightly against the morning chill. These small interactions were what made his job special, the connections he built over the years with the residents along his route. As he turned onto Pine Street, Marcus noticed something different about the neighborhood's atmosphere. The usually well-lit Thompson house at number 243 was completely dark, which was unusual since Mr. Thompson always left for work at this hour with his lights on. Marcus made a mental note but continued his routine, years of experience having taught him to be observant of such details. The streets in this part of town were lined with modest but well-maintained two-story homes, each with neat lawns and carefully tended gardens. Marcus knew every family, every pet, and every schedule. He knew which houses put their bins out the night before and which ones rushed out in their bathrobes at the last minute. Working methodically, Marcus stopped at each house, operating the mechanical arm that lifted and emptied the bins with practiced precision. The quiet morning was punctuated only by the hydraulic hiss of his truck's machinery and the occasional barking of dogs awakened by his presence. As he approached the Mitchell residence at 256 Pine Street, something felt off. Marcus had known the Mitchells since they moved in 3 years ago. Sarah, a bright-eyed 12-year-old who often waved to him from her window, and her mother Lisa, a hard-working nurse at the local hospital. Their gray two-story house usually had warm light streaming from the kitchen window at this hour, as Lisa prepared for her early shift. But today, the house was dark except for a faint light from an upstairs window. The curtains in Sarah's room were moving slightly, despite there being no wind. Marcus slowed his truck, years of working in the neighborhood having given him an instinct for when things weren't quite right. He pulled up to their driveway, noticing that Lisa's blue Honda was still in its usual spot. That was strange. She should have left for work 20 minutes ago. The garbage bin wasn't in its usual perfectly straight position either. It was knocked slightly sideways, as if someone had bumped into it. Marcus reached for his thermos of coffee, his eyes still fixed on the Mitchell house. In his 15 years on this route, he'd learned to trust his instincts. Something about the silence, the darkness, and the slightly askew curtains in Sarah's window made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He was about to call his supervisor to report his concerns when movement caught his eye. The side gate of the Mitchell house slowly opened, but instead of seeing Lisa heading out to her car or Sarah leaving for her morning soccer practice, he saw something that made him instantly set down his coffee and reach for his phone. A small figure in pink pajamas was carefully slipping through the gate, looking back over her shoulder repeatedly. Even from this distance, Marcus could see it was Sarah, and something about her movements spoke of fear rather than her usual cheerful energy. Marcus's heart began to beat faster as he watched the young girl glance frantically up and down the street. In all his years on this route, he'd never seen such terror on a child's face. As their eyes met through his windshield, he could see she recognized him, and in that moment, she made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Sarah began running toward his truck. Sarah Mitchell's bare feet slapped against the cold pavement as she ran toward Marcus's garbage truck. Her pink pajamas fluttered in the morning breeze, and her long brown hair streamed behind her. The look of sheer terror on her face made Marcus's blood run cold. Without hesitation, he opened his truck's passenger door. "Mr. Marcus." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, choked with fear. Her hands were shaking as she scrambled into the high cab of the truck. "Please help. There are men in our house." Marcus quickly shut and locked the door. Sarah was trembling violently, her face pale and tear-stained. He noticed she wasn't wearing any shoes, and her feet were dirty from running across the street. The morning air had left goosebumps on her arms. "Take deep breaths, Sarah," Marcus said calmly, though his heart was racing. He had known this child since she was 9, had watched her grow up on his route, exchanging waves and friendly greetings. Now she sat beside him, terrified and vulnerable. Mom was in the shower. Sarah managed to say between quick, panicked breaths, "I heard voices downstairs. Men's voices. We weren't expecting anyone, and they were walking really quietly, like they were trying not to make noise." Marcus kept his eyes on the Mitchell house while reaching for his phone. The upstairs bathroom window was steamed up. Lisa was still in the shower, unaware of the danger below. The house appeared quiet from the outside, but Marcus knew appearances could be deceiving. "I was reading in my room," Sarah continued, her voice steadying slightly as she hugged herself. "When I heard them, I peeked out my door. I saw 2 men I didn't know going through our living room. They were wearing dark clothes and gloves. One of them had a crowbar." Marcus's hand tightened on his phone as he dialed 911. Sarah went quiet as he spoke to the dispatcher, clearly and quietly reporting the situation. He gave them the address and explained that he had a young girl with him who had escaped the house, while her mother was still inside. "They're sending help right away," Marcus assured Sarah after hanging up. "The police will be here very soon. Can you tell me anything else about the men you saw?" Sarah wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her pajamas. One was really tall with a black jacket. The other one was shorter and wearing a gray hoodie. "I didn't see their faces good because I was scared, but I heard them talking about finding Mom's jewelry box." Marcus nodded, keeping his voice steady and calm despite the gravity of the situation. "You did the right thing, Sarah. You're very brave for getting out and finding help." "I remembered what Mom taught me," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "She always said if something bad happens, find a trusted adult. And you're always so nice to us, Mr. Marcus. I knew you would help." The trust in her voice made Marcus's throat tight with emotion. He thought of his own daughter, just a few years older than Sarah, and how terrified he would be if she were in this situation. He silently thanked God that Sarah had managed to escape and find him. Through the truck's large side mirrors, Marcus kept watch on the street. The neighborhood was still quiet, with most residents still asleep behind their drawn curtains. The Mitchell house remained still, no movement visible through its windows. Marcus knew that somewhere inside, Lisa was probably finishing her shower, completely unaware of the danger in her home. "Will Mom be okay?" Sarah's question was filled with worry. Her small hands clutched the edge of the truck's seat, knuckles white with tension. "The police are coming," Marcus assured her, though his own anxiety was mounting with each passing second. "They know exactly what to do in situations like this. Your mom will be fine." As if in answer to his words, Marcus spotted something in his side mirror, movement at the end of the street. His heart leaped as he recognized the subtle flash of blue and red lights, silently approaching with their sirens off. Help was arriving. But even as relief began to wash over him, Marcus saw something else that made his blood freeze. The front door of the Mitchell house was slowly opening. Marcus's large hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he watched the Mitchell's front door ease open. Sarah let out a small gasp and shrank down in her seat, making herself as small as possible. Time seemed to slow down as a tall figure in black emerged, looking cautiously left and right. "Don't worry," Marcus whispered, although his own heart was pounding. "The police are almost here, and these windows are tinted. They can't see you." He reached over and pulled an old blanket from behind the seat, draping it over Sarah to help her feel more hidden and secure. The man in black stepped onto the porch, followed closely by his shorter companion in the gray hoodie. They moved with an unnatural casualness, as if they were trying to appear normal to any early morning onlookers. The taller one carried a duffel bag that looked full, while the shorter one still gripped the crowbar. Through the truck's mirrors, Marcus could see the police cars moving silently up the street from both directions, their lights now off completely. They were coordinating their approach, trying to trap the burglars between them, but the criminals were already outside, and if they spotted the police, there was no telling what they might do. Sarah's small voice broke the tense silence. "Mr. Marcus, Mom's still in there. She always takes long showers before work. She plays music on her phone really loud. She probably can't hear anything. Her words stumbled out in a frightened whisper. Marcus nodded, his mind racing. The burglars were now walking down the driveway, heading straight toward his garbage truck. This was a regular pickup time, so his presence wouldn't seem suspicious, but he needed to act natural. With deliberate calmness, he reached for the controls of the mechanical arm, making it move as if he was about to pick up the Mitchell's garbage bin. The two men paused, watching the mechanical arm's movement. The taller one said something to his companion, and they altered their course, moving toward the sidewalk instead of coming closer to the truck. Marcus silently thanked his years of experience that made his actions look routine and unremarkable. Just then, a sound split the morning quiet, a shower shutting off, audible through the upstairs bathroom window. The burglar's head snapped up at the noise. The shorter one started to turn back toward the house, but his partner grabbed his arm, shaking his head. They quickened their pace, trying to maintain their casual appearance while clearly anxious to get away. Marcus could see the police cars were now positioned at both ends of the street, officers quietly taking up positions behind trees and cars. They were close, so close, but the criminals were about to pass right by his truck. If they ran now, they might escape through the yards between houses. Making a split-second decision, Marcus activated the truck's hydraulic lift system, creating a loud mechanical noise that made the burglars jump. In that moment of distraction, the police made their move. "Police! Don't move! Hands where we can see them!" The commands rang out from multiple directions as officers emerged from their positions, weapons drawn. The shorter burglar dropped his crowbar with a clang. The taller one looked wildly around, clutching his duffel bag, but they were surrounded. Within seconds, both men were face down on the ground as officers moved in to handcuff them. Sarah was crying softly under the blanket, but these were tears of relief. Marcus kept one hand on her shoulder, providing silent comfort as they watched the scene unfold through the windshield. More police cars arrived, their lights now flashing, and neighbors began emerging from their homes to see what was happening. Through it all, Marcus and Sarah remained in the safety of the truck's cab, watching as officers entered the Mitchell house. Minutes that felt like hours passed before they heard a woman's frightened voice. Sarah, Lisa Mitchell, wrapped in a bathrobe with wet hair, was being escorted out of the house by a female officer. "Mom," Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. "Stay here just a moment longer," Marcus said gently. "Let the police clear everything first. They'll bring your mom to us." As they waited, Marcus looked down at the brave young girl beside him, still wrapped in his old truck blanket. In the growing morning light, he could see the fear finally starting to fade from her eyes, replaced by exhausted relief. The nightmare was ending, but Marcus knew this morning would stay with all of them forever. The reunion between mother and daughter brought tears to everyone's eyes. As soon as the police gave their approval, Sarah burst from the truck and ran straight into Lisa's waiting arms. They held each other tightly, both crying and speaking in broken sentences. "Baby, I had no idea. I was in the shower, the music." Lisa's words came between sobs as she ran her hands over Sarah's face and arms, checking for any injuries. Her hair was still dripping, her bathrobe secured hastily, and her feet were in mismatched slippers. Marcus stepped down from his truck slowly, giving the family their space while remaining close enough to provide his statement to the police. Officer James Rodriguez, a veteran cop with kind eyes, approached him with a notepad. "Mr. Johnson, we need to understand exactly what happened this morning," Officer Rodriguez said, his pen poised to write. "Your quick thinking and calm response likely prevented this situation from becoming much worse." As Marcus recounted the events, more neighbors gathered on their lawns, watching as the two burglars were placed in separate police cars. The duffel bag had been recovered, containing Lisa's jewelry box, their laptop, and other valuable items from the house. "I was just doing my regular route," Marcus explained, his voice humble. "But something felt off about the house when I got here. Then I saw Sarah running toward my truck, and I knew something was seriously wrong." Meanwhile, a female officer named Sarah Chen was gently questioning Sarah and Lisa. The young girl hadn't left her mother's embrace, but her voice was stronger now as she described hearing the intruders and making her escape through her bedroom window. "You taught her well," Officer Chen told Lisa, who was still visibly shaken. "She knew exactly what to do in an emergency. Get out safely and find a trusted adult." Lisa looked over at Marcus, her eyes filled with gratitude. Marcus has been our garbage collector since we moved here. He's always been so kind, always watching out for the neighborhood. I'm not surprised Sarah knew she could trust him. The morning sun was fully up now, casting a warm glow over the chaotic scene. Crime scene investigators arrived to process the house, and neighbors brought over blankets, coffee, and offers of support. The Mitchells' next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, insisted they come stay with her until the police finished their work. "We've identified the suspects," Officer Rodriguez announced, returning from his patrol car. "They're part of a gang that's been targeting homes in the surrounding suburbs. They've been watching houses, learning residents' routines. They knew Lisa was a nurse who took morning showers before her early shift." This revelation sent a chill through everyone. Lisa pulled Sarah closer, if that was even possible. "We'll be installing a security system today," she said firmly. "And I'm requesting a change in my shift schedule." Marcus, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "I'd be happy to keep an extra eye on your house during my morning routes. Maybe we could exchange phone numbers, just in case." "That would be wonderful," Lisa replied, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "Marcus, I don't know how to thank you. If Sarah hadn't." "If you hadn't." She couldn't finish the sentence. "No thanks needed," Marcus said softly. "We look out for each other in this neighborhood. That's what community means." Officer Chen approached with some papers in her hand. "We'll need you both to come to the station later to make formal statements. But for now, you should get some rest. Here's my card if you need anything." As the crowd began to disperse and the police started wrapping up their investigation, Marcus knew he needed to continue his route. But before he left, Sarah broke away from her mother and ran to give him a tight hug. "Thank you, Mr. Marcus," she said, her voice muffled against his uniform. "You're my hero." Marcus patted her head gently, his own eyes growing moist. "You're the real hero, Sarah. You were so brave and smart today. I'm just glad I could help." As he climbed back into his truck, Marcus watched Lisa and Sarah walking hand in hand to Mrs. Patterson's house. He said a quiet prayer of thanks that this story had a happy ending. Starting his engine, he knew this morning had changed something in the neighborhood forever, making their community bonds even stronger through this shared experience. The garbage route could wait a few minutes. For now, Marcus sat in his truck, watching over the Mitchell family until they were safely inside their neighbor's home, knowing that sometimes being a garbage collector meant being much more than just that. The police station buzzed with activity as Lisa and Sarah Mitchell sat in a quiet interview room later that afternoon. The walls were a soft beige color, meant to be calming, and a kind-faced detective named Maria Ramirez sat across from them, reviewing her notes. "The men who broke into your home are James Cooper and Michael Reynolds," Detective Ramirez explained, placing 2 photographs on the table. "They've been targeting single-parent households in 3 different counties. Your quick actions today helped us crack a case we've been working on for months." Sarah, now dressed in borrowed clothes from Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter, stared at the photos. The men looked so ordinary, nothing like the monsters they'd seen that morning. Lisa kept her arm protectively around her daughter's shoulders as they listened. "We found detailed notes in their car," the detective continued. "They'd been watching your house for 2 weeks, learning your schedule. They knew exactly when you'd be in the shower, Lisa. They even knew about Sarah's morning soccer practice, which is usually at this time." Lisa's face paled at this information. "Thank goodness practice was cancelled today due to the coach's illness," she whispered. "Otherwise, Sarah would have been outside waiting for her ride when they came." Detective Ramirez nodded gravely. "Sometimes blessings come in disguise. Now, we've recovered all your stolen items, and we'll need to keep them as evidence for a few days. Both men have extensive criminal records, and with the evidence we have, they'll be facing serious time." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Officer Chen entered, carrying a tray with hot chocolate for Sarah and coffee for the adults. "Marcus Johnson is here to give his statement," she announced. "He wanted to check on you both first." Sarah's face brightened at the mention of Marcus's name. "Can we see him?" she asked, the first words she'd spoken since arriving at the station. Marcus entered the room, still in his work uniform, but clearly having cleaned up after finishing his route. He carried a small stuffed bear from the station's collection for young victims. "How are you holding up?" he asked, handing the bear to Sarah, who hugged it immediately. "Better now," Lisa replied, managing a small smile. The police have been wonderful, and Mrs. Patterson insisted we stay with her until we can get our security system installed tomorrow. Detective Ramirez watched this interaction with interest. Mr. Johnson, your presence of mind this morning was remarkable. Many people might have panicked or made a wrong move, but you stayed calm and kept Sarah safe while alerting us perfectly. Marcus shrugged modestly. I've been doing my route for 15 years. You get to know the people, the patterns. When something feels wrong, you just know it. The burglars mentioned you in their interrogation, Officer Chen added, making everyone look up in surprise. They said seeing the garbage truck actually made them feel safer, like everything was normal. They never imagined Sarah would run to you for help, or that you'd notice anything wrong. That's what they get for underestimating our neighborhood garbage man, Lisa said firmly, reaching out to squeeze Marcus's hand. We're having a neighborhood watch meeting next week. Would you be willing to come? Share your experience, maybe help us all learn to be more observant. Of course, Marcus agreed. Though I hope nothing like this ever happens again. Detective Ramirez gathered her papers, preparing to wrap up the interview. One last thing, the media's gotten wind of this story. They're calling it the Garbage Man Hero. Would you be comfortable talking to them? It might help other communities learn from what happened here. Lisa and Marcus exchanged glances, then looked at Sarah, who was still clutching her new bear. What do you think, sweetie? Lisa asked. Are you okay with people knowing your story? Sarah considered for a moment, then nodded. If it helps other kids know what to do when they're scared, then yes, but only if Mr. Marcus does it with us. We're kind of a team now. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Yes, we are, he agreed softly. And teams stick together. As they prepared to leave the station, Detective Ramirez watched the unlikely group, the nurse, her daughter, and the garbage collector who had become their hero. In her 20 years on the force, she'd seen how tragedy often brought people together, but this was different. This was about community, trust, and the everyday heroes who watched over their neighborhoods, even if they were just doing their regular routes. The morning's terror was over, but its lessons would remain, strengthening bonds that would last a lifetime. A week after the break-in, the Mitchells' living room was packed with neighbors. Every chair was occupied, and people sat on cushions on the floor. The community had come together for the promised neighborhood watch meeting, but it felt more like a family gathering than a formal event. Mrs. Patterson had brought her famous apple pie, Mr. Rodriguez from across the street supplied coffee, and various other neighbors contributed snacks and refreshments. Sarah sat between her mother and Marcus on the couch, looking much more relaxed than she had a week ago, though she still kept close to them. I never thought something like this could happen in our neighborhood, said Tom Wilson, who lived 3 houses down. We've always felt so safe here. Lisa nodded, addressing the room. That's exactly what made us vulnerable. The detective said these men specifically targeted neighborhoods like ours, places where people feel secure enough to let their guard down. Officer Chen, who had become a regular visitor to check on the Mitchells, stood up to speak. What happened here last week could have ended very differently, but thanks to 3 things: Sarah's quick thinking, Marcus's alertness, and this community's strong bonds. We caught criminals who had been terrorizing families across 3 counties. The officer clicked through some slides on her laptop, showing security measures and safety tips, but everyone's attention really focused when Marcus stood up to share his perspective. I've been collecting garbage in this neighborhood for 15 years, he began, his deep voice carrying naturally through the room. Over time, you notice patterns. Which lights should be on at what time, which cars should be where, what sounds are normal for each street. He paused, looking around at the familiar faces. That morning, things just felt wrong. The Thompson house was dark when it's usually lit. The Mitchells' garbage bin was knocked sideways. Small things, but they didn't fit the pattern. Sarah spoke up suddenly, surprising everyone. That's why I ran to Mr. Marcus, because he always waves to me every Tuesday and Thursday. He remembers my birthday and asks about my soccer games. I knew he would help. Several neighbors wiped tears from their eyes as Sarah spoke. Her words highlighted something important: the value of knowing and trusting the people who were part of their daily lives. We've installed new security systems, Lisa added, but our real security comes from looking out for each other, knowing our neighbors, paying attention. The meeting evolved into a practical discussion. People exchanged phone numbers and created a text alert system. They planned a rotation for checking on elderly neighbors and watching out for children walking to school. Marcus's garbage route schedule became part of their security planning. His regular presence was now recognized as an important part of their community's safety net. "The media keeps calling me a hero," Marcus said, shaking his head modestly. "But real safety comes from all of us working together." Sarah was brave enough to ask for help. Lisa had taught her what to do in emergencies. The police responded quickly because someone in this room had reported suspicious activity in the neighborhood last month. Mrs. Patterson stood up, her voice firm despite her 80 years. "Well, I'm baking you a pie every week, Marcus Johnson, whether you like it or not. Heroes deserve pie." The room erupted in laughter, breaking the serious mood. As people broke into smaller groups to talk, Sarah tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Mr. Marcus," she said quietly, "Mom says you're coming to my soccer game this weekend. Is that okay?" Marcus smiled warmly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, kiddo. Just don't expect me to run any laps." Lisa watched this interaction, her heart full. The tragedy that could have destroyed their sense of security had instead strengthened it. Her home now had a top-of-the-line security system, but more importantly, it had a community of guardians. As the meeting wound down and neighbors began to leave, each person stopping to hug the Mitchells or shake Marcus's hand, Officer Chen made one final observation. "You know," she said, looking around at the remains of the impromptu feast, the exchanged phone numbers, and the genuine warmth in the room, "this is exactly what community policing is about. It's not just about locks and alarms. It's about people caring enough to pay attention, to help each other, to build something stronger than any security system." Sarah, half asleep on the couch after all the excitement, still clutching her stuffed bear from the police station, mumbled something that made everyone nearby smile. "We're not just neighbors anymore. We're family." And looking around the room, no one could disagree with that assessment. 3 months after the break-in, the Mitchell story had created waves far beyond their small neighborhood. Local news coverage had turned into regional interest, and finally, a national morning show decided to feature their story as part of a series on community heroes. The television crew set up their equipment in the neighborhood park on a crisp autumn morning. Golden leaves drifted down as Sarah, now more confident than ever, practiced soccer moves nearby. Lisa sat on a bench with Marcus, both of them watching the crew prepare. "Are you nervous about the interview?" Lisa asked, noting how Marcus kept adjusting his collar. "A little," he admitted. "I'm used to people not noticing garbage collectors. Now everyone wants to hear what I have to say." The interview setup was informal, 3 chairs arranged under a large oak tree. The morning show host, Jessica Chen, no relation to Officer Chen, had a warm presence that put everyone at ease. "So, Sarah," Jessica began, once the cameras were rolling, "what made you trust Marcus that morning?" Sarah, sitting between her mother and Marcus, thought for a moment. "He was always kind," she said simply. "Not just to me, but to everyone. He remembers details about people's lives and asks about them. That's how I knew he really cared." The interview continued, covering the events of that morning and their aftermath, but what really caught the host's attention was how the incident had transformed the community. "Our neighborhood has completely changed," Lisa explained. "Not just with security systems and watch programs, but in how we relate to each other. We have monthly community dinners now. People check on their elderly neighbors. Children know they can go to any house with our neighborhood watch sign if they need help." Marcus added his perspective. "People often overlook service workers, garbage collectors, mail carriers, delivery people. But we see your neighborhoods every day. We notice patterns. We can be an extra set of eyes keeping your community safe." The story's impact reached far beyond their neighborhood. After the interview aired, cities across the country began implementing programs to include service workers in their community safety networks. Garbage collection companies started training their workers in community awareness and safety protocols. Sarah's soccer team had embraced the changes too. They now ended every practice with a discussion about safety and awareness. The coach had invited Officer Chen to teach self-defense classes, and the girls had developed a buddy system for walking home. "The most beautiful thing," Lisa told the interviewer, "is seeing how this scary experience has turned into something positive. Marcus isn't just our garbage collector anymore, he's family. He comes to Sarah's soccer games, joins us for Sunday dinners, and even helped us plant a new garden. The camera panned to show their front yard, where bright autumn flowers bloomed in beds that Marcus had helped design. A small bench sat among the flowers, painted with the words, "Community grows here." "And Mrs. Patterson still bakes you a pie every week?" Jessica asked Marcus with a smile. "Every single week," he laughed. "I've had to start sharing them with the other garbage collectors, or I wouldn't fit in my truck anymore." After the interview, as the crew packed up their equipment, several neighbors gathered in the park. They'd been watching from a respectful distance, and now came forward with hugs and congratulations. "You're going to be famous now, Mr. Marcus," Sarah teased, performing a perfect soccer drill around him. "I'm just doing my job," he replied modestly. "The real story is how this community came together." Lisa touched his arm gently. "You're too humble, Marcus. You showed us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they drive garbage trucks and have the biggest hearts." As the autumn sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, the gathered neighbors decided to have an impromptu picnic. Someone brought out blankets, another ran home for snacks, and soon the park was filled with laughter and conversation. Sarah sat cross-legged on a blanket, teaching younger children the safety lessons she'd learned. Marcus watched her with pride, amazed at how the frightened girl who'd run to his truck had grown into such a confident young leader. "You know what's really amazing?" Lisa said softly, sitting beside him. "That morning could have left us scared and isolated. Instead, it showed us the power of community, the importance of looking out for each other, and how ordinary people can make extraordinary differences in each other's lives." As the evening wore on, the park filled with the warm glow of friendship and shared purpose, proving that sometimes the worst moments can bring out the best in people. 1 year after the break-in, the Mitchells' neighborhood had become a model for community safety programs across the country. On a warm summer evening, hundreds of people gathered in the community center for a special ceremony. The mayor stood at the podium, addressing the packed room. "Today, we're here to recognize not just one hero, but an entire community that showed us what it means to look out for each other. We're proud to announce the launch of the Johnson Community Watch Program, named after the man who showed us that every person in our community plays a vital role in keeping it safe." Marcus sat in the front row, still in his work uniform, looking slightly embarrassed by all the attention. Sarah, now 13 and sporting her soccer team captain badge, sat beside him with Lisa. They'd become his second family over the past year, their Sunday dinners together a cherished tradition. "The program," the mayor continued, "will train service workers across the city, garbage collectors, postal workers, delivery personnel, in community awareness and safety protocols. But more importantly, it will help build the kind of relationships that saved Sarah Mitchell's life that morning." The ceremony included testimonials from various community members. Mrs. Patterson, still baking her weekly pies, spoke about how the neighborhood had transformed. "We used to just wave at each other. Now we know each other's stories, share each other's lives. That's real security." Officer Chen, who had become the program's police liaison, shared statistics showing a significant drop in crime rates across neighborhoods that had implemented similar community watch programs. "But the numbers don't tell the whole story," she said. "It's the relationships that matter most." When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she walked to the podium with confidence, her voice strong and clear. "A year ago, I was just a scared kid who knew she could trust our garbage collector. Now I'm part of something bigger. We teach other kids about safety, but also about community, about paying attention to the people around you and being there for each other." The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a new sign that would be posted throughout the city. A simple design showing connected houses with the words, "Johnson Community Watch Program. Together we're stronger." Marcus stood beside it, tears in his eyes, as camera flashes captured the moment. After the formal proceedings, people gathered in the community center's garden for refreshments. The two burglars who had inadvertently sparked this transformation were serving long sentences, but their actions had led to something unexpected: a stronger, more connected community. "You know what's funny?" Lisa said to Marcus as they watched Sarah teaching younger children the safety signals they'd developed. "That morning could have made us all retreat behind locked doors and security systems. Instead, it brought us out into the open, made us reach out to each other." Marcus nodded, watching the gathered crowd with pride. His garbage collection route hadn't changed, but everything else had. Other workers now waved to him as a mentor. someone who had shown them the importance of their role in the community. "I never wanted to be a hero," he said quietly. "I just did what anyone would do." "That's exactly why you are one," Lisa replied. "Heroes are just ordinary people who pay attention and care enough to act." As the evening wound down, Sarah gathered her friends for a soccer game on the community center's lawn. Parents sat chatting on benches, neighbors shared stories over coffee and Mrs. Patterson's pies, and the sense of community was palpable in the warm summer air. Marcus stood watching it all, remembering that terrifying morning a year ago. He thought about how a single moment of trust between a frightened girl and her garbage collector had sparked a movement that was now spreading across the country. "Mr. Marcus," Sarah called from the makeshift soccer field. "Come play with us." "You know I'm not much good at soccer," he laughed, but joined them anyway. As the sun set over the community center, casting long shadows across the lawn, the scene painted a picture of what community could be, not just houses on a street, but people connected by trust, care, and the simple act of looking out for each other. The garbage truck would still roll through their streets every Tuesday and Thursday morning, but now it carried more than just trash. It carried the symbol of how ordinary people doing ordinary jobs could become extraordinary when they chose to pay attention and care about the communities they served. And somewhere in the distance, a new day was dawning, bringing with it the promise of more communities learning to grow stronger together. The end.